I just had an amazing experience with some colleagues dealing with grief, and I realized this is something that I really need to share. So let's talk about it. Hi, Dr. Holly here. So I was just in Tucson with the folks from Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine, and I was there for an alumni and associates event, which means it was all healers, all physicians, physician assistants, nurse practitioners, all folks that are kind of in the healing space. And during that time, we engaged in a grief workshop. This wasn't something I was originally planning to attend, but I had a few kind of clues along the way from the universe telling me, you need to check this thing out. So I went, led by an amazing healer, a family physician out of Canada who actually leads our fellowship. And we all gathered around on yoga mats that they had provided to us. And we first discussed grief and how prevalent it is, especially since the pandemic, especially amongst healers. And those can be traditional healers, spiritual healers, energy healers, what have you, because we feel all the things. We are present for a lot of loss, a lot of changes. We've also had to deal with our own feelings and experiences during the pandemic and losses. And when you are in something that is so emergent for so long, it's really similar to like what my veterans talk about, like you're dealing with a loss and you're going on to the next thing and dealing with saving the next life or not. And you don't give yourself a lot of time to process that and deal with what you just experienced. So that in itself can add to a lot of grief that is unresolved and unaddressed. Also, just our day-to-day lately, we've had a lot coming at us. Healers and those maybe who don't identify as healers, who just have a healing spirit, still have a lot of things that maybe you haven't given yourself space for. So something that we talked about in our discussion is an unresolved grief, an unaddressed grief, a grief that's kind of just there smoldering, and hints that maybe that's what's going on. So things such as if you're hearing about someone else's loss and you find yourself tearing up and unable to not enter into a space of extreme sadness, that's a trigger, a clue that perhaps you're being triggered in a way because you have your own grief that you haven't dealt with. Watching things on TV that normally you can kind of handle, but finding the tears flowing. Again, another clue that perhaps there's some grief there that you haven't fully addressed. Grief isn't something that just shuts off, that we kind of do for a period of time and then there's closure and it's over. No, grief can be ongoing. It can ebb and flow just like the tides in an ocean. I myself have had grief from the loss of family members, from the loss of jobs, the loss of relationships. And I found that those can sometimes poke up at times that I don't fully expect. For myself, we had this experience. What we did is we all sat around on these yoga mats, as I said, that were provided. And we were encouraged to basically start crying. In a lot of cultures, they have folks who are professional grief experiencers, professional woe wailers. In New Orleans here, we have bands that come and play for a second line. And oftentimes the songs initially start out in a more sad space, allowing for that grief to occur before they flip into a more celebration of life. But having that experience with others surrounding you, allowing space for grief, is very healing. So basically, we were encouraged to be professional wailers and to fake crying and wailing. Like, we were pretty dramatic about it until our systems kind of started doing it naturally. For some of us who are maybe a little more tuned in, I myself had some things come up during a meditation earlier that day. I didn't need to do the faking. I was all in. And it really was interesting for me, like what came up. I went through grief of my health. I've had a recent diagnosis of Ehlers-Danlos that I guess triggered losses that I've had along the way. I've been dealing with health issues for over 30 years, but having that recognition and that diagnosis really, I guess, allowed some space for some grief that I thought I had processed, but obviously had not. I went on to grieve some health issues in my family. I even went into some ancestral work, grieving losses in my family line. I mean, there were all kinds of things coming up for people. One of the providers there is from a war-torn country and dealing with having family members who are in positions that are unknown, and day to day not knowing if they're going to be able to speak to them or if this is the last time speaking to them. There are others who are first responders, as I've kind of spoken about, and in places of healthcare where maybe they didn't feel like they were given the space needed to fully heal and fully grieve. So I'm sharing this mainly because I suspect most people watching this have some grief that maybe is lingering, smoldering under the surface, or maybe something more recent that comes to mind right away. But if you find yourself in a space where other people crying or grieving is super uncomfortable for you, like you want to go over there and pat them and break up their grief, and basically you're hijacking their grief, like you're not really allowing them the space to grieve, check yourself and maybe think about what's coming up for you. Or if, as I mentioned, you find other experiences are triggering the tears to fall for you, this may be a practice to consider. And it really is just creating a space for yourself. You can have a ritual around it, light some candles, play some music that maybe helps the tears flow, whatever you need to do to maybe think about watching a sad movie, thinking of a sad story, thinking of the loss yourself, whatever you need to kind of help yourself enter into that space. It's actually super healthy to do this. It's, maybe every few months, every 6 months, every year, whatever you need to keep yourself addressing the grief that is there, the losses that you've experienced, the losses that maybe your family line has experienced that epigenetically have become a part of your makeup that maybe you're still carrying around. Allow yourself that space. Allow yourself the freedom to grieve, to be, to allow the tears to flow, to allow the sadness to take over. Grief doesn't have to be just from a death of an actual person or animal. It can be the death of a career. It can be the death of a job that you thought was a good fit, the death of a relationship that maybe didn't go the way you predicted, the end of a friendship that maybe you decided or was decided for you. It can be a number of different things. I mean, as I said, my health was an experience that I was grieving. The health of family members, that they're now different than what you pictured. All of these things are losses, and they deserve space to be recognized. And our spirits deserve the space to grieve them. So I invite you to consider that. I hope it serves you. Please reach out if you need some support around this. If this practice feels too overwhelming, if you need some guidance, if you are in a space where maybe your grief has turned into something darker and you're having thoughts of suicide, having thoughts of ending your own life, having thoughts of how it would be easier to be dead, then maybe you've entered into a space more of depression or needing some help. So please reach out, if not to me, then to a loved one, to the crisis line, anything that feels in alignment with where you are at. Just know that we love you, we adore you, we want you here, and there's definitely resources available. So please reach out, whether you are dealing with grief or having difficulty getting through the grief, or, as I've said, your grief has turned into something that is bigger than you, that you're not able to kind of take care of with the support of family and friends. So you can find me on darawellnessnola.com or in social media at darawellnessnola, and just reach out and know that I'm here for you. Sending lots of love and support.